Welcome to ESGX Live, the community for information and education to inspire collaboration and action to help build a stronger, more resilient and more inclusive economy and society. With me, Nigel Lake in New York, and my co-host in San Francisco, Paul Herman. We're going to talk today about the subject of waste and new ways to recycle waste. And we're joined as well by guest host, climate finance strategist, Lucia Polman, to help talk our guests through some of the issues. I wanted to start just with a few facts and figures about the world of waste from the United States to start off with. Firstly, we generate something like 270 million tons of municipal domestic waste in the United States. That's US short tons. The amount of building and construction waste, however, is much greater. It's something like 569 million tons, so about twice as much as municipal domestic waste. Out of the domestic waste, about 35% or so is being recycled or composting. So if I just pop up these figures for a minute, you can see that this is somewhat stalled in terms of progress on recycling. Europe is doing a bit better. Nearly 50% of all waste from municipal sources is recycled. And all of this made me think about my own experiences when we moved office originally, and this was when we founded Pottinger back in 2003, and a couple of years later fitted out an office. And I remember being shocked by the amount of effort that was going into something that you might only stay in for 3, 4, 5 years. And then of course, all that waste would be material would be thrown out and not recycled at all. So I'm fascinated to see from the discussion today how some of these things are potentially changing. So with no more ado, I will hand over now to Lucia to introduce our guests and take us through the rest of the discussion. Over to you, Lucia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am really excited to talk today about the circular economy because I feel like when we look at waste in America and across the world, as Nigel said, 1/3 of overall waste in the United States and in the UK comes from the building industry. In the UK, construction industry accounts for 60% of all materials used and generates 45% of all CO2 emissions in the process. And on our current course, we're set to triple material extraction in 30 years and also triple waste production by 2100. And so when we think about this, we have to think of buildings as material depots, as deposits that we can be using as an opportunity. And when we look at other industries, there's been a lot of progress. So in most cars, for example, contained over 70% recycled material, while the average new building is comprised of just about 1%. So to lay out more about this opportunity for the circular economy in our built environment, I want to invite our first panelist to describe some of his work in urban mining. And this is Andrew McCue from Metabolic.
Thanks, Lucia. And thanks for the nice intro, setting the tone about how critical building materials are in the built environment is to issues of waste and sustainability. So my name's Andrew McCue. I'm a sustainability consultant with Metabolic. We're a circular economy and systems thinking organization based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. We do a lot of work with cities, businesses, and NGOs around topics in the circular economy, and a lot of that work does focus in on the built environment. There's several reasons for that. The one has already been alluded to is the amount of environmental impacts that are produced when we manufacture these goods. So these are what's known as embodied impacts or embodied emissions. And these are what are being measured when we're doing something like a consumption-based emissions inventory in a city. All that to say that when you have concrete or steel or glass in a building, and you go to renovate that building and none of those materials are reused, all of the impacts created in raw material extraction, from energy use and greenhouse gas emissions to toxic runoff or water consumption, those are then lost. So one of the key aspects of the circular economy is about maintaining the value of materials at their highest level so that we don't cause those impacts to be repeated every time we need to use a similar material in the future. I'd also like to point out that the built environment is responsible for a huge amount of waste in municipal waste streams. It causes, well, it's usually one of the largest amounts of tonnage sent to landfill in US, EU, and UK settings, mostly because our buildings are not designed to be effectively disassembled or deconstructed. So this is a major problem for us looking forward for issues in greenhouse gas emissions, in critical material consumption, but also when you think about what the next 10 years hold for us, we're trying to hit that 1.5 degree or 2 degree target from the IPCC and to limit the damage of climate change. That means the next decade is the most important for action. Any building you build now, you are expecting to get 30 to maybe even 100 years of use out of that building before it's fully demolished. And there might be iterations or renovations or remodeling along the way, but you're going to be locked in to a certain amount of waste and a certain amount of consumption during that time. So we need to be making the right choices now. One of the things that will help with that is a form of understanding urban mining within, be it a neighborhood, a certain development, or a city or region. Metabolic has developed an urban mining tool currently in use in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and Philadelphia, amongst other regions, where we are able to estimate the amount of raw materials in any given building typology, whether it's residential, high-rise, low-rise, commercial, industrial, what have you, and estimate the environmental impacts caught up in each of those materials, as well as their financial value on the secondary market. This allows us to then start to understand what the supply of raw material is in the urban mine. But as you can see on the right-hand side of this image here, we don't want to just go straight to raw materials. We want to be cycling these building products at their highest level of value. So we also added in the ability to estimate over 200 different kinds of distinct building products, from insulation panels to windows, interior doors, ceiling panels, foundations for floors, steel beams and the like, that could be reused as they are. Now, one of the main problems you see if you start to establish urban mining within a city today is that none of the buildings were designed for material recovery. So as Nigel was speaking to, if you have an office, retail spaces, I think, turn over on roughly 2 to 4 year bases, where they remodel the entire interior. None of that is designed to be modular or disassembled and reused or resold. It instead goes from being a valuable infrastructure within a store or an office space to being just a burden on the city and on the haulers who are hauling it to waste. So what we want to be able to do then is to not only understand how many materials are available and how many building products are available in the city, we're also able to show, based on building and demolition and renovation permits, when we expect certain materials to become available in a given area, how much that they would be worth, and then also how much demand is expected in the coming period. This is a tool that cities and regions are currently using to then match demand for new building materials with the supply of existing materials in the urban mine. Moving forward, though, this is going to only be supplemented when we start to design buildings for disassembly. So one of the other things that we've been working on is working with investors and banks to assess the circular economy potential and sustainability of their real estate portfolio and help them put their money towards more sustainable or circular buildings and projects. This allows us to sort of help the finance sector drive investment towards the right decision-making in real estate and construction. The last thing I want to point out here is that it comes down to sort of the future of urban mining, and the circular built environment will come down to how we design buildings and how we build them in the future. We're already seeing a lot of advances in modular construction, designing buildings for deconstruction by using mechanical fasteners instead of adhesives, by using different modules that can be reassembled for other buildings. These are very promising first steps that will actually turn buildings into valuable mines in the flip side of their use, I would say, when they start to be demolished or remodeled. A key factor that will enable that as well, that we're starting to see implemented by certain real estate companies, is a material passport for each building that they sell, detailing the value of all the materials and products in it, increasing its value later on in its life when it starts to be demolished or remodeled, rather than creating a burden on the local community. It's a valuable asset to be mined later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. I think the big takeaway that I had from what you were saying is just that there's a whole information economy that has to grow out of the circular economy around what is in our buildings, how do we keep track of that information, and once we're able to manage all of that information and be transparent across different building owners, we're going to be able to see a lot of gains in the circular economy for the built environment, which seems really exciting. Next up, we have Dorte Christensen, who is really leading this on the ground in a business perspective. So I'd like to invite Dorte to start and just tell us a little bit about your firm.
Thank you, Lucia. Hi, I'm Dorte. I have a small company in Denmark on the Isle of Man with my brother. It's a very traditional small company. We are about 20 people and have carpenters, brickworkers, and plumbers. It's our company is about 45 years old. Our father started it, and we have been in the company for about 10 or 15 years. And about a year ago, we would like to do something new to develop, but how and what, we didn't know. And by coincidence, I had a meeting with Jens from the commune, the business part, and he had this very exciting project called Manufacturing the Future. And then we met Rodin Genov and had a great talk about how we could get further with our company. And this is how our green adventure started.
Really interesting. And what made you want to try and design and build a circular economy house?
Actually, we wanted to make the whole company sustainable or circular, but that's a very big job. And how to get started with this? Actually, we don't have a summer house in our portfolio as it is today, but the summer house could be a start. And while we were learning to use new materials and learn to get to know about this circular economy. Yeah, and we live on this very beautiful Isle of Man, so circular is absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah, as the image shows, in June 2017, UNESCO designated Møn as Denmark's first biosphere reserve. How did you get involved with the Dark Sky Møn UNESCO project?
Actually, there is a part on the Isle of Man where we are working with this biodiversity and calls it the Møn UNESCO Biosphere. And with our work in this circular economy with our house, they were very happy to have us with them on board. And it's actually just people living on Møn being in this project, and also companies. And this dark sky. We are trying on Moon not to have so many lightning outside. So we get this very nice dark sky to have a look on these beautiful stars. And to honor this, our house is called PKC Dark Sky House.
And what kind of problems were you trying to solve with the design of this building on dark sky on Moon?
In a business like ours, we have a lot of waste, and we have been looking into this for many years now. And we would really like to have a lot less. But to start up with this, it's also about the materials. We need to use some new materials. We can use the same as we always have done. So this was also our summer house that gives us this new learning.
And what kind of tips do you have for noobs like me who don't know all of the details of different circular economy development practices? What kind of practicalities or specific aspects of buildings have you really prioritized in this design?
The foundation, if we were going to build this summer house in the traditional way, it would always be some kind of concrete we would use. And in this summer house, we are using a steel screwed foundation. So we don't get this concrete foundation. And actually on the field under the house, we are using the grass and the soil, put it into the roof. And then if you look at it from above, you actually can't see the house. And then the biodiversity is intact. Working with these materials, it's actually like preparing your favorite dish and haven't been able to use any of the ingredients that you already know.
Thanks. And I think kind of leading into our next panelist, the final question that I have are, what are the biggest challenges for a small company trying to take steps toward circularity in the built environment? What has been your experience on the ground?
New projects takes time. And with a fully booked calendar, it's very difficult to have time to do this. Both my brother and I have small children, so we haven't got this extra time. So it's very important to have good people around you. And with Jens and Rodin, we had the men with us that knows about how to get these financial projects. So we have been working with Linear Group from Copenhagen, architect firm that who are working with sustainability, and also a local engineer. And they have also give us the opportunity to work with DTU, the Danish Technology University. So financial ways to go further, that's crucial.
Thank you, Dorte. And speaking of good people, I'd like to bring Rodin Janoff to the stage to speak a little bit about his work and his experience working with Dorte on projects. So Rodin, please kick it off.
Thanks a lot, Lucia, and good morning, everyone. Dorte, you're absolutely amazing. And I think what a great case study that you bring to everyone. We have to remember that, look, SMEs form the backbone of the economy, and especially out in the regions like a place like the Isle of Man. And quite often it's the regions that get left behind. And if we're really going to transition to sustainability and pick up these ideas, we need to make sure that we take SMEs with us. Now, anyone who's worked with SMEs and would know that for them to make the transition to go from a traditional business model to a circular business model, you're basically running two businesses at the same time. You have to keep your existing workflow going, bring money in, and then invest that into the new model. And the exciting thing about Daughter's case study is it really takes a whole region to help support an SME. What we saw there was the Manufacturing the Future program. It was funded by the Danish government. It brought together the region, the cities, the industry associations, and then Daughter was able to get some funding to connect up with some wonderful sustainability engineers and architects like Linear, who did the amazing Wasteland project in Copenhagen. But a little bit about me. My name's Roden Jenoff. I run Roden Jenoff and Associates. Look, my company does works globally. We've been established for some 20 years. We've developed some very interesting bespoke cluster mapping, data analytics and spatial mapping tools. So what we do is that we map clusters and ecosystems. At the moment, we've got a fantastic project in Sweden. You can see the map there. It's the region Dalarna. This is the manufacturing heartland of Sweden. And we're mapping the bioeconomy ecosystem, which brings together sawmills, forestry, building and construction, engineering and software companies. And the thing about the project that we're trying to map is to understand the performance of this building and construction bioeconomy ecosystem. So we're mapping Industry 4.0. That's the digitalization that's driving and going to be a huge disruptor in the building and construction industry. We can come back to that later. Their innovative performance, their transition to circular economy, and very importantly, the importance of how gender can drive innovation. Because as we write in our book, New Women, New Men, New Economy, 50-50 balanced teams deliver superior financial performance and optimize experimentation. And if companies are to make the transition, develop many balanced teams and women involved in these projects as possible. So when we do this audit, we come to something that looks like this. The little square boxes you can see are the companies that we've interviewed. The little green round circles are all of their suppliers. What we do is we identify the open innovation systems within that ecosystem where we can optimize collaboration to develop new products and services. And for example, coming out of this project, we've got a wonderful joint venture between a sawmill that's going to do new surface treatment to eliminate toxins in the process, with an architecture company to build apartments and high-rise timber buildings. And what's about to be announced in September by the regional governor of Sweden, which I'm very excited about, is Women Building Sweden. So we've pulled together women CEOs from engineering to building construction and architecture. Here's a sneak preview of some of the designs for the logo. And we're going to have women helping to drive investment and growth and new partnerships and sustainabilities in the manufacturing heartland of Sweden. And I must say, this is why Sweden continues to rank #1 to #3 in the global innovation indices year after year, because they're really out there. So Lucia, that's just a quick snapshot of what we're up to.
Thank you so much, Roden. So just to recap kind of what we've gone over so far, we know that there's an opportunity. There's a lot of resources in our built environment that we can utilize as we continue to rebuild and remake our urban landscapes and our rural landscapes. And there's a lot of tools that have been developed on how to capture that information and share it to make it worthwhile. And smaller companies like Dorta's have been able to take their first steps towards implementing circularity in the way that they're thinking about the design of their buildings. And as Roden kind of lays out there's an ecosystem that small businesses need to be a part of if this is going to be possible. And there are projects that most circular economy projects are unable to be vertically integrated. They're not a single entity doing all of the work, but instead it's a true diverse network that needs, everyone all has a role to play. And for a lot of these systems, increased financing is really needed to push companies over the edge to take the next step. So this brings me to our fourth panelist, Tasia, who is going to lay out how her firm, Closed Loop Partners, has been playing a role in bringing these critical projects, innovations, and companies the financing they need to take the next step into the circular economy.
Thanks, Lucia. Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here, so bear with me. I'm breaking the mold of everybody else who is so organized here. Bear with me. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, it looks great.
Super. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Tasia Smith. I'm a managing director at Closed Loop Partners. I hope everybody is doing well and staying safe and healthy. Thank you very much to ESGX for having us here today. All of my former panelists did a really great job of explaining what the circular economy is. I will just go ahead and reiterate that for the past 75 years, the world has really been operating on a linear economy, which requires us to extract, to manufacture, to consume, usually just once, and to throw away. And that linear model is really great and profitable for the extractive industries and for landfill owners, but it's expensive, harmful, and costly for consumer goods companies, actually, for municipalities, for consumers like all of us, and for the planet. So the circular economic model really aims to reduce, if not eliminate, the extraction, and really views that quote unquote waste component as a very valuable input, as you heard all of the other panelists describe. So that's the premise in Closed Loop Partners. We are a firm that was founded in 2014, and we are an innovation center and asset management firm dedicated to the advancement of the circular economy. So on our innovation side, our innovation center is called the Center for the Circular Economy. And we work with global companies, the likes of Walmart and Unilever, or Coca-Cola, on a project basis. We leverage expertise in systems thinking, just like Metabolic, and in pre-competitive collaboration with a goal to advance industries towards circularity. So let me put this into the context of an example with our Next Gen Consortium, which is a project anchored by Starbucks and McDonald's. And the goal is to reimagine the hot, cold to-go fiber cup. And that really, when you think about that in the context of systems and why we're different than say a traditional consultant, is why would McDonald's and Starbucks work together on something? Well, simply because there's no recycler in the world who is going to sit there and pick out just the Starbucks recyclable cups, right? You need to find a solution that can work within a system and advance the industry, and then they can compete. So just giving you a sense for what that means in terms of pre-competitive collaboration and the work that we do there. The center comes up with quite a bit of research and establishes Closed Loop Partners as a thought leader in the circular economy. And you can find many of our works on our website, and we encourage you to read through those. One of the differentiating features of our firm is while we have several fund managers and recovering bankers like myself, we're actually predominantly a deep bench of environmental engineers, head of municipal agencies, former CEOs and CFOs and operators of companies in the circular economy space, or predecessors thereof. So that's really interesting. And then just to chime in on Rodin's point, because he teed this up really well, we're also 2/3 women. Then over on the asset management side of our firm, We manage 4 main investment verticals, if you will, and we have different funds in each of those verticals. That's project finance, venture capital, growth equity, and private equity. I'm happy to dig in. I'm going to give you a brief overview there, but the investors in all of our strategies include corporations, institutional, traditional financial investors like pension funds or foundations, and then family offices focused or interested in the circular economy for strategic and financial reasons. I will say that the investors in our project finance funds are limited to corporates, many of which you can see up here on the screen. They include some of the largest consumer packaged goods companies and retailers like Amazon, Johnson & Johnson, Nestle, Pepsi, Danone. The purpose of the project finance strategy is to improve and increase recycling infrastructure, recyclable materials, much of what the other panelists were talking about before, and enhance circular supply chains across the US. So the investment strategy actually has become a very clear demonstration of the success of public-private partnerships in achieving financial and net positive environmental outcomes for stakeholders that include the corporates themselves, their customers, that's us, municipalities, and the planet. And while the project finance funds provide debt, much like Lucia was alluding to, in terms of advancing these companies and capitalizing them appropriately so that they can compete in the economy, our private equity fund is actually acquiring companies, largely in the collection, sortation, and what we call remanufacturing spaces. And that area is currently extremely fragmented and inefficient, and it's our goal to scale very high quality businesses and advance this capital transition to circularity. Just moving quickly forward so that we can move into the panel and engage. Our venture capital funds are focused on very early stage businesses globally that represent innovative solutions across packaging, food and agriculture, textiles and apparel, and then supply chain logistics technologies. And I can't wait to talk to you about some of these businesses like Amp Robotics and Algramo and Cambridge Crops that are addressing some of the things that were mentioned before. And then last, I'll just briefly mention our growth equity strategy, which is focused on fashion and apparel. There's been quite a bit written about the fashion sector lately, given the disruption of COVID. That sector has declined almost 50%, and you're seeing some very public, high-profile bankruptcies. The industry has been ripe for restructuring and has the opportunity to become more circular and thereby more resilient. So that strategy is focused on business to business or B2B solutions that can help these bigger brands advance towards circularity. So for all our investment strategies, we focus on the benefits of circular supply chains and what it means for supply chain optimization and resource efficiency. The net positive environmental and social outcomes include tons diverted from landfill, greenhouse gas emission reduction, cost savings to municipalities, job creation, and then syndication or driving of additional capital to these circular solutions, just as Lucia was saying. So very eager to dive into all of this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and look forward to speaking with all of you.
Thank you, Teza. So I think one of the things we were talking about last week was that to increase recycling of construction and demolition waste, and we need to invest in a certain kind of infrastructure. And I'd love for you to just describe what those industrial systems are that can help handle construction and demolition waste, and also what happens when you improve those facilities to the overall circular economy beyond just the built environment.
Yeah, well, we definitely think about it integrated throughout, again, the system. So not compartmentalized into just demolition and construction or D&C waste. I'll just say for the purposes of this call, many of you are probably very familiar with this if you have knowledge of the circular economy, but a lot of what happens is materials get picked up and they either go to landfill or they go to a material recovery facility. And making sure that we have material recovery facilities that can handle all types of waste and are well functioning and is part of the issue. Right now, that infrastructure is completely lacking in the United States. It's lacking globally, but it's really lacking globally. But let's just look at the United States as a case in point. It's very much lacking. And so it's requiring, we have to think through, why isn't capital flowing there, right? If it was a great investment, capital would flow. So how do we change systems, incentives? How do we get corporate engagement? Two of the things to improve from a system perspective and get both capital and therefore more materials to flow through in this infrastructure is thinking through some of the redundancies that we have right now. When let's think about some of the stakeholders. The municipalities actually equal, or the municipal sector actually equals a lot of that feedstock across materials, including demolition and construction, right? And how do we make sure that those contracts and that feedstock is really consistent so that the business that's processing it can rely on that from a transparency perspective and know what materials coming in, right? And then similarly, more importantly in changing the system is how do they price that going out? So how do we get big corporations to contract for the long term so that there's long-term offtake agreements from the companies that then consume? Maybe it's Home Depot that resells some of this DNC, and maybe they engage in a long-term contract where they pick up recycled lumber. I'm making this up only slightly, but once they've done that, now this business that processes it all, this infrastructure that processes it all, has transparent cash flows that get really attractive to banks and financial investors. They've lowered their cost of capital, they can get scale, they can invest in CapEx to build up their company and become higher quality. That's one element, and we're going to get into that a bit more, but understanding how to make the capital flow there by mutually beneficial agreements and incentives that actually benefit the system. The other point that I wanted to make was removing some redundancies. So a municipality may have RFPs out there to say, pick up my plastics, pick up my residential trash, pick up my DNC trash, pick up all of this. They require different processes, different haulers, different transport, other words, different processors, and there's maybe different facilities. The more we can synthesize all of this in a local area to handle the locally produced waste, to reduce that transport cost and produce what we call that remanufacturing sector, all kind of consolidated on site, not only do you reduce the kind of negative externalities that I know we're all familiar with when it comes to greenhouse gases, but you also reduce a lot of the inefficiencies that create a big cost for companies. And by reducing that cost, you're going to incentivize money to flow because profits are going to be wider.
Great. Thank you for all of that detail. Roden, hearing that, do any particular geography, cities, systems around the world that you've looked at or worked on, do you feel like they're leading the charge? We have a question from John Bird about what best practices and leading examples there are in the space.
Look, I think it's very important because we need to look at the big picture systems frameworks. Very clearly, the European Union and European countries, I mean, you know, it's great to see Metabolic, for example, based in the Netherlands. And there's a reason for that, because there's a regulatory framework that's enabled regulation to help drive innovation. And that's very important because, as Taja was suggesting earlier, it's about having certainty. And if we have certainty in the regulatory environment, that also then combines with industry policy and sustainability policies to build the capacities and capabilities of companies to make the transition, that's where we can then start building profitability for companies and also certainty. Very simple example that everyone will understand. In Denmark, they led in terms of wind energy. The government put in strict regulations, they drove the process, but that was accompanied by a very aggressive industry policy and an assistance program to bring companies together, to work with the universities and to work with business. They called that the triple helix, as they talk about that in Europe. The reality now is that in Australia, we're a cashed up country. We buy the wind turbines from Denmark, and because they also have the systems, they then control the wind turbines from Denmark. So they've created a whole global export industry. This then becomes very important because we have a lot to learn from the European model in terms of government setting a regulatory and policy environment to support companies to make the transition to have that certainty. So in the case of Daughter, for example, as an SME, with that assistance, to be able to go to Lanier, get some subsidizers up to 100 engineering hours from a circular economy engineer to support design, she wouldn't have been able to sell a house and then transition into a completely new business.
Thank you. And Andrew, I noticed that you answered some of that question in text, and I'd love if you could share it with the whole room, maybe focusing on cities in the US like Charlotte or perhaps Austin, Texas, and talk a little bit about what the circular economy looks there.
Yeah, Charlotte, North Carolina was the first North American city to explicitly adopt the circular economy as a city strategy. Their initial concern was twofold. One, running out of landfill space, and the other was actually economic development. They were looking for ways to capture that value and direct it towards the most needy populations in and around Charlotte and create new job opportunities. One of the things that came out of that project was that circular uses for materials in the waste stream could generate exponentially more and support exponentially more employees than landfilling or even conventional recycling. So some of the things that they're doing, they are building, they're building an innovation and research center called the Innovation Barn that will be explaining concepts of the circular economy, enabling small, light and medium manufacturing using waste streams, and running education programs. In addition, Austin, Texas has been running at least a materials marketplace for several years now to connect secondary materials with potential buyers in the region. They have a pretty full-on circular economy and zero waste team at Austin. The last one I wanted to point out was actually Phoenix, Arizona, which I didn't mention in the chat. The really cool thing they've done for innovation is they've created a program, an accelerator program, or incubator program actually, called the Risen Accelerator at the University of Phoenix, I think. Anyway, this accelerator is predicated on developing technologies and businesses to make use of waste streams from the city. The city will put in a token amount of money, but the main guarantee is that they will guarantee sort of first right of access to these materials that they collect. So if you have a use for yard waste separate from food waste, the city will ensure that they collect it separate from other organic waste and let your business scale up. So that is one of the most encouraging partnerships and programs that I've seen in the US around the circular economy.
Cool. And I think really clear that there needs to be an ecosystem of collaboration for progress to be made. But we also have a lot of questions about specifics of what materials are critical to transform. I think one that's come up in a lot of questions from the audience is around concrete. And I was wondering, Dorta, if you could speak to how your firm is thinking about using concrete sustainably, if there's alternative types of concrete that you guys are looking into, or perhaps a complete substitute?
Yeah, actually, in a company like ours, we need to have the traditional way, and we can make this more sustainable way because we are working in this little area. But in the traditional, we will still use concrete. We haven't found out what to use instead. But in this summer house, we can use this screwed foundation, and we use them as lot as we can.
Are there any other materials, and this is for all panelists, that you feel really excited about right now and think are going to be a big stepping stone for the industry?
I'll come in. First of all, just to finish on the concrete, it's such a big industry, and so many companies are involved. And once again, many SMEs have invested in existing systems, and how do we transition them? For example, in Denmark, there was a company called Fibo Engineering. They designed a fantastic machine. We turned that into a new business model so that they can take the machine out to building sites, crush up the concrete, and then turn that rubble into concrete that then can be used on site. And that new business model has enabled this small SME to develop an export market right around Europe. That enables them to take the next step and to develop new initiatives around that waste management sector. I think the really big one, and all the panelists would agree, and Andrew, please feel free to chip in, our daughter as well, is obviously timber buildings. The amount of investment at the moment going into the development of design of timber buildings, from cross-laminated timbers to the glues to take out the toxins, and the design to be able to accommodate heavier and larger structures, is very, very important. And what we're doing with our ecosystem in Sweden is bringing together the sawmills, the forestry industry, the building and construction companies, and also the architecture companies to be able to put the smarts within that. The challenge, though, is also what happens on the building site in terms of being able to develop a circular economy supply chain. But I think Europe at the moment, once again, if we look at the cross-laminated timber, which is essential for making high-rise, there is currently a research project by the European Union bringing together several countries to be able to develop the cross-laminated timber processes and take them to their next level. And they're using that to drive export, so the architects and building and construction companies can win markets from Australia right through to Southeast Asia. And in fact, those companies are now building those sorts of buildings in Japan, exported from particularly Sweden.
Thank you. We have another question directed at you, Tasia, about how private equity and the circular economy are playing together. John Bird asked, because private equity is historically famous for using lots of leverage and extracting a lot of cash flows, is that changing with your model? And similarly, Jay Frazen asked, VC and related financing mechanisms are themselves extractive in nature due to the demand of high ROI and the perception of risk as justification. And if there's any kind of change in the way that Closed Loop Partners is thinking about venture capital and private equity.
Yeah, a couple things that are deep in our ethos, and we're not alone in this. I hope you guys are familiar with this trend towards builder capital. When we think about our venture, let's start with the venture side, and then I'll get to the private equity side. So venture, really thinking about helping a company. We invest in companies that are all post-money valuation of 10 million and less. So it really is seed and pre-seed small businesses with an eye on cash flows. And it's really about getting this company to be, I can't say sustainable because that means something different in this context, but to become stabilized and to grow. And for that entrepreneur to grow a company from a $10 million business to a $200 million business is a very big feat. And the data shows that that's where a great deal of value creation actually happens. So what we aren't managing is a portfolio where we're striving for a unicorn. If one of the companies IPOs for $1 billion or more dollars, that's fantastic for our limited partners and our investors. But the goal is to build a big portfolio of solid companies that are participating in this circular economic model and delivering solutions. Typically, we're investing in essential services. We're investing predominantly in B2B. We're trying to advance the system. And I keep coming back to that word because it's critical. If we all look at the stakeholders within the financial system, We're trying to integrate sustainable finance such that we start calling it finance. And in that, that's going to require some regulatory. I mean, if we could just go ahead and price carbon, I think we could solve the problem. But it's going to require collaboration around, or the synthesis of regulation, which we've seen before, right? Regulation exists. We have an SEC. And then an element of stakeholder participation. And so you're starting to see accountability for end of life, and what might have been measured as a traditional ROI will have to take into account externalities that haven't been priced into the system previously. And all of a sudden that ROI that was previously achieved by that venture fund isn't going to look the same or be calculated in the same way, and therefore will not be market rate. That's the goal. So our firms are market rate striving by the traditional financial definition, and we strive for net positive environmental and social outcomes, which we also measure and report on. Over on the private equity side, just to quickly touch on leverage, I will say that while we are a buyout strategy on the private equity side, and we are taking control stakes, we don't view ourselves as sitting back as financial engineers. As mentioned, our firm is rather differentiated by being a deep bench of operators, former CEOs, CFOs, environmental engineers. We are there to help the company operate and improve. We want it to grow and scale with high quality performance metrics that aren't just financial, but also environmental and social. And again, we strive to be top decile in our private equity group, but we set out to show how quality is actually measured. And so having less leverage, I think from a standpoint of exit, that's going to come into play. So we're not just reverse engineering from an exit. We need to be thoughtful about what that exit looks like. Again, delivering on those returns, but proving that we can do so in a way that that hits our impact outcome metrics as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much. And I think it's really important to note what you said, that to make that transition to considering non-financial outcomes as equally important, regulation can play a really big role. And we have some great questions from Michael Simpson about whether code changes will be necessary to build for deconstruction, and kind of what roles the municipalities play. Andrew, I saw that you took a stab at that question. I was wondering if you could answer it live for our audience.
Yeah, happy to. In general, you're going to see cities going to have to take a large role, especially in the built environment. In the US, what we actually find is states will have to step in, and that can slow things down a little bit. Often cities are not allowed to set requirements in the building code, for example, for reporting on material passports or use of secondary materials that are more stringent than state code. So it is going to have to be a bit of an alliance between city and state governments to adjust regulatory frameworks. Here in Amsterdam, here in the Netherlands, it's very common for cities to own most of the land in a city and lease them out on 99-year leases to private businesses or landowners. That gives them a lot of control over new developments and building codes and requirements. So tendering guidelines and public procurement have been the major levers for cities in the Netherlands and across Europe for enabling the circular economy, but certainly code changes have to be on the table, I think.
Thanks. And another question from Michael, this one for Tasia, is, does Closed Loop Partners assist cities with innovation challenges? And I think a little bit of context behind that question is clearly to make actionable change in the circular economy, we need to be supporting new ideas and businesses. And that can happen from the municipal side or the public sector side and the private sector side. And I think innovation challenges are a really interesting way that cities are tackling their biggest issues. And I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, Tasia.
Yeah, sure. Municipalities are critical stakeholders across all of our all of our investments, particularly our project finance strategy. So the closed loop infrastructure fund, for example, which has 13 of the largest consumer packaged goods companies and retailers in the world as the investors, about 60% of the loans made out of that strategy are to private companies and 40% are to municipalities below market rate. They're to catalyze capital and to engage us, obviously, as lenders and participants in outcomes. So the capital from the corporate investors is there to achieve a strategic return. Their goal is to advance recycling infrastructure throughout North America, and the municipalities are critical to that. So without some of this financing, they would not therefore be able to spend money to improve their systems, to innovate around things, for example, like thinking through new materials. Now, this is a an example of a private loan, but there's a company called TemperPak, which created an insulation that instead of styrofoam, is for the cold chain. You can imagine, and it's curbside recyclable, excuse me. So you can imagine that that's going to be really important to somebody like Walmart that has grocery, or Amazon that now owns Whole Foods, or to any type of biotech company that needs to ship cooled or temperature controlled materials, and giving a loan that then provides some degree of capex that wouldn't have been available to an emerging or innovative company, allows them to build the facility. Now they can produce en masse enough that they can deliver into a Walmart or an Amazon. So you see how that strategically benefits the corporate, and they prioritize that strategic return. We catalyze an innovation. I realize I kind of divulged or diverted from the municipal question, but it all comes back then to the municipality, because what is that curbside recyclable material now? It's feedstock from the municipality. It's us who make up the municipality as users, and it's diverted material from landfill. And most importantly, I guess, or most specifically, this is a great point from a municipal budget standpoint, diversion from landfill is extremely critical. Our CEO was hired by Mayor Bloomberg to reinvent the recycling system of New York City as part of his administration when he was the Deputy Commissioner of Sanitation. And Bloomberg was saying that we were spending $400 million a year in New York City on trash. That's expensive, right? And that's not even counting for the infrastructure. That's just what it costs to landfill. So the more that we can save municipal budgets from that and help them innovate within recycling, you're improving the quality of life, you're improving the capitalization, you're improving margins, you're improving the budgets of municipalities. So it's all very interconnected. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thanks. One final question. We're going to wrap it up in the next 3 minutes, but I want to do a rapid fire question to all 4 panelists. And this is just to leave the audience with an example of a company or a project in the circular economy in the built environment that you would nerd out with your coworkers about and see as a shining light in the industry. And you can just name the project or the company, and then take just a quick 30-second explanation of it, and then we'll be able to share those as resources to the audience after the episode. So popcorn style, whoever's ready can go first.
I'll go. I'll give my other panelists a chance to think. There's a lot of really neat companies, but I'm going to pick Algramo. Algramo just won a National Geographic Ocean Plastics Award. You might just think about this company and say, how does this fit in the built environment? Well, I'll tell you. So what Algramo does is it is an RFID chip enabled reusable container and the hardware and infrastructure to go get the amount of soap you want, go get the amount of dog food you want, go get the amount of shampoo you need. And what that does for emerging markets, it reduces the purchase of those little sachets, which cost 40% more to the people who can afford that least and cause a great deal of pollution into our environment. So by changing to a quote soda stream like model for a lot of our household goods, we actually reduce waste quite a bit. Where this comes into the built environment, again, where you can go into affordable housing communities and set up this almost vending machine-like delivery solution such that you can buy 40 cents of something and pay wholesale or bulk prices. That's really meaningful. It's a great delivery mechanism. It actually increases things like sanitation, improves costs, it reduces plastic and pollution. And I think it's a neat way to think forward on the integration of our built environment and how we can think through us being inside of that and make it completely circular.
Thank you.
Great. I'm happy to go. I've been inspired by somebody that's also helped Daughter. It's an architecture engineering company called Lanier. They've got this amazing book, A Changemaker's Guide to the Future. They helped set benchmarks in Europe in the Wasteland project, which is one of the largest urban regeneration projects in Copenhagen. They embodied so much of what we're talking about around circular and pulling a whole community, including the city of Copenhagen, including government, which now has learned from this to set new policy. I suggest everyone go out and buy their book because it's amazing, and they're such a great values, purpose-driven company that's generated such great impact, not only in Copenhagen, in Denmark, but sending ripples right across the world and even into Australia. So the book's called A Changemaker's Guide to the Future, the Lanier Group. Thank you.
Andrew, Dorta?
Yeah, I have to say, I will risk being seen to toot my own horn, but these projects were completed before I joined Metabolic, so perhaps it's not so bad. But there is a project in Amsterdam called, oh God, let's see if I can pronounce it, Schoonschip, which is Dutch for clean ship, that Metabolic and a number of other partners designed several years ago, about 2 years before I joined Metabolic. That is a floating neighborhood of better than passive house standard houses, all self-owned and self-designed by the community who formed 10 years before they actually moved into the houses. And they were able to work with the consortium that we were a part of to create budgets for the embodied impacts of the materials, the deconstructibility of the houses, the circularity of their consumption in the use phase for heating, water, power, organic waste. And they were all able to design unique houses that met these stringent standards. And they are beautiful houses. I want to live in one. So I totally nerd out about those. And I would add a second similar neighborhood, sort of self-designed by a community called De Warren, or De Warren in Dutch, that is being designed to similar principles, but not floating, in Amsterdam's way of creating a new neighborhood, building a new island. I'll put the link to that in the chat as well.
Yes, actually, I would mention Lanier too, but when Rodin already has done that, I will mention a Danish company called Sustera that use seaweed for isolation. That's a very nice project they have there. So,
thank you all. So I'm going to turn it over to Nigel, who's going to wrap us up. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Well, I think that's been a really fascinating and quite uplifting discussion in lots of ways. I think when we're faced with tough challenges like dealing with waste in the urban environment, it's very easy to focus on how hard they are to solve, how complicated the problems are, how you have to get lots of people to work together, and you end up feeling it's going to be expensive and you don't know where to start and you don't know where to pay for it. And I think we've seen from all of this, and for me, I think Daughter's words, the motivation at the beginning, well, we want to do this because we want to make our company sustainable. Now, that has then led into a discussion where we've been able to see, that there are lots of lots of things which are really positive in this. Firstly, there are tools and systems and experience to help companies act on this at all sorts of different scales, and both from Andrew and from Rodin, I think we've seen some really interesting material. We've seen in practice from Daughter that you can go and do this. You don't have to be a large company. You can be a small company and this can work. And from Tasia, there is money out there to support this. And as she put it, and this is not an investment advertisement, but as she said, at the right place, companies get really attractive to banks and to financial investors. And I can certainly vouch from that from some of the work we've done with companies in Australia in this space. I think the other thing that I've taken away from this is kind of three big points, perhaps. One is this is clearly a team sport. It's very hard to do this by yourself. Secondly, there is a real global opportunity here. Companies that can crack this in a particular niche or field can export that capability all around the world. And we've also seen from Daughter's project, you can end up with something very beautiful as well. I'll flag one book before we wrap up here. And this, as Rodin mentioned, the book he wrote with Narelle Hooper a couple of years ago, New Men, New Women, New Economy, I think is a very interesting set of themes as to how to think about all of these things. And before I hand over to Paul to give us a bit of a heads up on what's coming up, I'd also just like to add a request, if you can do your part, which is if you can like the videos on YouTube and share them with your friends and colleagues. If you've enjoyed this is really helpful in getting the important messages from our guests out to a wider audience, and we've seen some really good things flow from that. So from me, thank you all very much for joining, and thank you to our panelists for a wonderful contribution. And I'll turn it over to Paul to wrap up and to talk about what we've got coming up.
Thank you, Nigel, and thanks very much, Lucia, for moderating, and our panelists, Andrew, Dorta, Tasia, and Rodin. And Nigel, always thanks for helping bring a global context and how we can be inspired, learn, and take action. Coming up on ESGX next week is our monthly Green Jobs Report with Dr. Scott Fulweiler, Dr. Fadel Kaboub, as well as Amir Khalegi and another special guest coming soon. So please join us next week for the Green Jobs Report, which will dig in deeper as to which industries are creating green jobs. Then the following week, after July 4th, we will have a Greening Your Retirement. And so we'll have a focus on 401ks, 403bs, as well as IRAs and Roth IRAs. So we hope you'll join us for that, especially since it'll be just over a week in the US to tax day. So you can potentially invest more sustainably for your IRA deduction. And then on July 14th, a very special episode that will include panelists from Africa and around the world. And so Doug Heskey of New Day will moderate. And we're excited that we'll be able to celebrate the 60-year anniversary of Jane Goodall landing in Africa and the Jane Goodall Institute, helping enhance our knowledge of how animals, people, and the environment can all thrive together. So please sign up for these upcoming ESGXs on esgx.org. Please share with your friends and community, as well as your policymakers and decision makers. We're seeking to bring you ways to learn, be inspired, and to take action. So we'll look forward to seeing you next time on esgx.org and the YouTube channel ESGX.